High Arbiter Velthara stood at the center of the sacred council chamber, her silver robes flowing like liquid metal in the dim light. The chamber was massive, carved from a single crystal that had once been a moon. Around her, representatives from 10,000 worlds sat in perfect silence, waiting for her words. "We have a problem," she said, her voice echoing through the vast space. "A small blue world called Earth." The council members shifted slightly. Problems were rare in the celestial dominion. For over 50,000 years, they had ruled the galaxy with absolute order. Every world followed the same laws, spoke the same language, and worshipped the same divine truth. Peace through uniformity was their way. Commander Keldon stepped forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow. In his hands he carried a data crystal that glowed with soft blue light. "High Arbiter, the reports from the Outer Rim are disturbing." Velthara nodded for him to continue. The commander activated the crystal and holographic images filled the air above them. The council gasped as they saw scenes from distant worlds. On Kepler 442b, humans in crude metal ships had landed 3 years ago. The local population, peaceful farmers who had served the Dominion for centuries, now carried strange flags with colorful patterns. They sang songs in their old language, something that had been forbidden for generations on Proxima Centauri C. Humans had built what they called cultural centers. Inside these buildings, beings from different worlds shared stories, art, and music. The planetary governor reported that productivity had dropped by 12% as citizens spent time on these creative activities. But the worst scene came from New Rigel. There, humans had actually convinced 3 different species to work together on a project they called a Freedom Monument. The monument was chaos itself, a wild mixture of architectural styles, colors, and symbols that hurt the eyes to look at. "They call it diversity," Commander Keldon said, his voice filled with disgust. "They say it makes them stronger." "Impossible," whispered Council Member Zafara. "Unity is strength, division is weakness. This is the first law of civilization." Velthara studied the images carefully. She had ruled for 3,000 years, and had never seen anything like this. Humans were spreading across the galaxy, but they weren't conquering worlds in the traditional way. They weren't forcing others to become like them. Instead, they were encouraging differences, celebrating what made each species unique. "How many worlds have they infected?" she asked. 47 confirmed, Keldon replied. "But the contamination is spreading. Other worlds are beginning to ask questions about the old ways. Some are even requesting permission to restore their ancient customs." The council chamber erupted in worried whispers. This was unthinkable. The Dominion had worked for millennia to create perfect order. Every world was the same. Every being followed the same path. It was efficient, peaceful, and divine. "There's something else," Keldon continued. "Our scholars have found references to an ancient prophecy in the sacred texts. It speaks of a chaos species that would arise in the final age. A species that would unravel the divine order and plunge the galaxy into darkness." Velthara's expression hardened. She had heard whispers of this prophecy but had never taken it seriously. Now, faced with evidence of humanity's strange influence, she wondered if the ancient warnings were true. "What do the humans want?" she asked. "That's just it," Keldon said. "They don't seem to want anything. They don't demand tribute or submission. They just exist alongside others. They trade, they learn, they share. They act as if every species has equal value." The concept was so alien that several council members stood up in shock. Equal value? The Dominion was built on hierarchy, on the understanding that some beings were naturally superior to others. The idea that a primitive species like humans could be equal to the advanced races of the Dominion was heresy. "This cannot continue," Velthara declared. "The chaos must be stopped before it spreads further." She turned toward the great doors at the far end of the chamber. Beyond those doors lay the Temple of Divine Instruments, where the Dominion's most powerful weapons were kept. Most council members had never seen what lay within, but they all knew the stories. "High Arbiter," Council Member Lexion said carefully. Surely, conventional forces would be sufficient. The humans have primitive technology. Their ships are slow, their weapons weak. Velthara shook her head. This is not a conventional threat. The humans are not using military force to spread their chaos. They are using something far more dangerous: ideas. Ideas that make others question the divine order. The great doors opened with a sound like thunder. Beyond them lay a corridor that descended deep into the heart of the crystal moon. Ancient symbols glowed on the walls, and the air itself seemed to hum with power. Come, Velthara said to the council. It is time to awaken the divine beast. The procession moved slowly through the temple corridors, past chambers filled with weapons that could destroy stars and devices that could reshape reality itself. But these were not what they sought. They needed something more than destruction. They needed something that could kill not just bodies, but the very ideas that made humans so dangerous. At the deepest level of the temple, they found the chamber of Mordek. The beast lay sleeping in the center of a vast room, his body partially hidden by shadows and ancient machinery. Even in sleep, he was terrifying. 50 feet tall, covered in crystalline scales that glowed with inner light, he looked like a dragon from the old legends. But he was much more than that. Mordek the Devourer, Velthara whispered, created in the early days of the Dominion to crush the most dangerous rebellions. He has cleansed 47 worlds of chaos and disorder. The beast's eyes opened, revealing pupils that burned like stars. His consciousness was vast and ancient, filled with memories of countless battles. He had been created not just to destroy, but to understand and eliminate the sources of disorder. His psychic abilities could reach into minds and crush the very thoughts that led to rebellion. Great Mordek, Velthara said, bowing deeply, we have need of your service once more. The beast's voice was like distant thunder. Show me the chaos. Keldon activated the data crystal again, and the images of human influence filled the chamber. Mordek studied them with the patience of a predator. He saw the mixed architecture, the collaborative art, the celebration of differences. To his ancient mind, trained in the ways of divine order, it was indeed chaos. I see, he said finally. This species spreads disorder like a disease. They convince others that weakness is strength, that division is unity. They must be eliminated. Not just eliminated, Velthara said. Cleansed, their ideas must be burned from the galaxy so completely that no trace remains. Future generations must never know that such chaos was possible. Mordek rose to his full height, his scales beginning to glow brighter. The ancient machinery around him hummed to life, preparing his body for the journey ahead. His consciousness expanded, reaching out through space toward the small blue world that threatened everything the Dominion had built. I understand, he said. I will go to this earth, I will study their chaos, learn how it spreads, and then I will cleanse it forever. The ritual began. Mordek's vast consciousness was uploaded with star charts, tactical data, and detailed information about human civilization. He learned their languages, their customs, their weaknesses, but most importantly, he was given one simple, absolute command that would guide all his actions: cleanse the chaos, restore divine order. As the great beast prepared for his journey, none of the assembled council members could imagine that they were about to make the greatest mistake in the history of the Dominion. They could not know that in sending their perfect weapon to destroy humanity's chaos, they were about to discover something that would change everything they believed about strength, order, and the very nature of civilization itself, the divine. Beast was about to learn that sometimes what looks like chaos is actually the most beautiful kind of order, one that grows from the heart, rather than being imposed from above. Dr. Hyun-Woo Kim was working late in his laboratory at Seoul National University when his computer started beeping. The sound was urgent, sharp, and very wrong. He looked up from his microscope and saw red warning lights flashing across all his screens. What the hell? He muttered, rolling his chair over to the main console. The numbers on his screen made no sense. His equipment was designed to detect energy signatures from space, solar flares, cosmic radiation, asteroid impacts. But this reading was impossible. Something massive was heading toward Earth. Something that gave off more energy than a small star. Hyun-woo grabbed his phone and called Dr. So-young Park, his research partner. She answered on the third ring, her voice sleepy and annoyed. "This better be important, Hyun-woo. It's 2 in the morning. So-young, you need to get to the lab right now." "Something's coming." "What do you mean? Something's coming? A meteor?" Han-woo stared at his screens, watching the energy signature grow stronger by the minute. "I don't know what it is, but it's big, really big, and it's slowing down." 20 minutes later, So-young burst through the lab doors, her hair messy and her clothes thrown on in a hurry. She took one look at the readings and went pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Nothing can decelerate that fast from interstellar speeds. It would tear itself apart." "That's what I thought too," Hyun-woo said. "But the readings don't lie. Whatever this thing is, it's using technology we don't understand." They spent the next hour running calculations, checking their equipment, and hoping they were wrong. But the truth was becoming clearer with each passing minute. Something alien was approaching Earth, and it would arrive in less than 6 hours. At 4 a.m., Hyun-woo made the call that would change everything. He dialed the emergency number for the Korean Space Agency, who contacted the Ministry of Defense, who woke up President Jin-ho Lee. President Lee was a calm man who had led Korea through many crises, but he had never faced anything like this. He sat in his pajamas in the Blue House Situation Room, staring at the same impossible readings that had terrified the two scientists. "How sure are we about this?" he asked. "Completely sure, Mr. President," said General Nam Soo-yoon, the defense minister. "We've confirmed the readings with observatories around the world. NASA, ESA, JAXA, they're all seeing the same thing." "President." Lee rubbed his temples. "And it's definitely not natural?" "No, sir. The object is clearly under intelligent control. It's been adjusting its course to aim directly at Earth." Within an hour, President Lee was on a video call with world leaders from every major nation. The UN Security Council held an emergency session that lasted 3 minutes, just long enough to confirm that humanity was facing something unprecedented. Military analyst Dongmin Cho worked frantically at his computer trying to calculate what they were facing. The numbers were terrifying. The object had enough kinetic energy to split continents. If it hit Earth at full speed, it would be the end of civilization. "Sir," he reported to President Lee, "if this thing doesn't slow down, the impact will be worse than the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs." But the object was slowing down. That was both good news and bad news. Good because it meant Earth wouldn't be destroyed by impact. Bad because it meant whoever was controlling it wanted to arrive intact around the world. People began to notice something was wrong. Social media exploded with reports of strange lights in the sky. Astronomers with backyard telescopes posted blurry photos of something that looked like a comet but moved in impossible ways. In Seoul, a young street artist named Bio-ra Kim was working on a mural on the side of a building in the Hongdae district. She specialized in colorful, chaotic art that mixed traditional Korean patterns with modern abstract designs. Her latest piece was her biggest yet, a celebration of diversity that showed people from all over the world working together to create something beautiful. As she painted, she felt a strange tingling in her head. It started as a mild headache, but grew stronger. She tried to ignore it, focusing on adding blue and green swirls to represent the ocean that connected all continents. At 6:47 a.m. Korean time, Mordek arrived. The divine beast's ship didn't look like anything humans had imagined. It wasn't a sleek metal craft or a spinning saucer. It was organic, alive, a part of Mordek himself. It looked like a giant seed pod covered in crystalline scales, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The ship crashed into the Yellow Sea. About 200 kilometers west of Seoul, the impact created a wave that raced toward the Korean coast at incredible speed. Emergency sirens wailed in Busan, Incheon, and every coastal city as people fled to higher ground. But the tsunami, while destructive, was smaller than expected. Mordok had controlled his landing, minimizing the damage. This was not an accident. It was a choice that would prove more important than anyone realized. Captain Tae-hyun Park was leading a squadron of KF-21 fighter jets toward the crash site when his radar picked up something rising from the ocean. What he saw made him forget all his training. Mordok emerged from the waves like a mountain coming to life. His crystalline scales caught the morning sunlight and threw it back in rainbow patterns. His eyes burned like stars, and his presence filled the air with a psychic pressure that made every pilot's head ring. "Command, this is Dragon Leader," Tae-hyun said into his radio, his voice barely steady. "I'm looking at T. I don't know what I'm looking at. It's huge, it's alive. And it's beautiful." Mordok stood in the shallow water, his massive form towering over the waves. He was 50 feet tall, built like a dragon from ancient myths, but covered in technology that seemed to grow from his body like a second skin. His psychic field expanded, reaching out to touch the minds of every human within 100 kilometers. This was the moment he had trained for. His consciousness was designed to read lesser minds, to understand their fears and weaknesses, and then to dominate them completely. He had done this 47 times before. It had always worked, but something was wrong. Instead of the simple, primitive thoughts he expected, Mordok's psychic probe encountered something complex and beautiful. Human minds weren't organized like other species. They were chaotic, yes, but the chaos had patterns. Emotions mixed with logic, dreams blended with reality, and individual thoughts connected to form something larger than the sum of their parts. In Seoul, Beora Kim dropped her paintbrush as Mordok's consciousness touched hers. But instead of being driven mad by the contact, she saw something incredible. She saw memories not her own but his. She saw distant worlds, ancient battles, and terrible loneliness stretching across thousands of years. "Oh," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're not here to destroy us? You're here because you're lost?" Mordok felt the girl's empathy hit him like a physical blow. In all his centuries of existence, no being had ever responded to his psychic probe with compassion. They had shown fear, anger, hatred, despair, but never this. He looked toward the city of Seoul, where millions of humans were dealing with his arrival in ways that made no sense to him. Some were fleeing, yes, but others were gathering in parks and on rooftops, pointing at him with curiosity rather than terror. Children were asking their parents questions. Artists were already sketching his form. Scientists were taking readings and making notes. News anchor Mi Jin-yu was broadcasting live from a helicopter, her voice steady and professional as she described the scene. "The entity appears to be observing rather than attacking. It seems to be studying us." She was right. Mordok was studying them, and what he saw confused him deeply. According to his programming, these humans should be cowering in fear or attacking in desperation. Instead, they were responding with the same chaotic curiosity that had infected the other worlds. He tried to focus on his mission. He was here to cleanse the chaos, to restore divine order. But as he watched the humans react to his presence, he began to wonder if he understood what chaos really meant. In a kindergarten in Seoul, a teacher named Sang-ho Kim was trying to calm his students as they watched the giant figure in the distance. But the children weren't scared, they were fascinated. "Teacher Kim," asked little 5-year-old Haijin, "why is the space dragon so sad?" Sang-ho blinked in surprise. "What makes you think it's sad?" "Look at its eyes," she said, pointing toward the distant figure. "They're like my puppy's eyes when he misses me." Mordok heard her words through his psychic field, and something cracked inside his ancient heart. A child, barely old enough to understand the world, had seen past his terrifying exterior to recognize his pain. This was not going according to plan. The divine beast stood in the yellow sea, water lapping at his massive form, and for the first time in millennia, he felt uncertain. He had been created to destroy chaos, but what if he didn't understand what chaos really was? What if the Dominion was wrong? The thought was heretical, dangerous, and completely unexpected. But as Mordok watched the humans of Earth respond to his arrival with curiosity, creativity, and compassion, He began to wonder if everything he had been taught about order and chaos might need to be reconsidered. The first day of first contact was ending, and already the divine beast was beginning to change. The second day after Mordecai's arrival began with Captain Tehain Park leading his squadron in another approach. His orders were clear: test the aliens' defenses, gather intelligence, and prepare for a full military response if necessary. Dragon Leader to all units, he spoke into his radio. Remember, we're not starting a fight. We're just showing this thing that Earth isn't defenseless. The fighter jets screamed across the sky toward the Yellow Sea, where Morduk still stood, like a living mountain. The divine beast watched them approach with interest rather than alarm. These flying machines were primitive but showed clever design. The humans had built them to dance through the air like metal birds. Tehayun's squadron fired a series of warning shots, their missiles streaking through the air toward the water near Mordecai's feet. The explosion sent up massive columns of spray, but the beast didn't even flinch. His crystalline scales absorbed the energy and converted it to harmless light. "Command, this is Dragon Leader," Tehayun reported. "Our weapons have no effect. I repeat, no effect whatsoever." Morduk could have destroyed the jets with a thought. His psychic power could have crushed the pilots' minds or simply turned their own weapons against them, but he didn't. Instead, he tilted his massive head and studied the aircraft with genuine curiosity. These humans were brave, he realized. They knew their weapons couldn't hurt him, but they still came to defend their home. This was not the behavior of a chaotic species. This was the behavior of a species that valued courage and loyalty. While the military tested their strength, something else was happening across the world. Humanity was responding to Morduk's presence in ways that no one had expected. In Seoul, news anchor Mi Jin-yu was conducting interviews with people who had gathered in Yoedo Park to watch the distant figure. She expected to find panic and fear. Instead, she found something remarkable. "I'm here with citizens who have come to observe our unexpected visitor," she said into her microphone. "Sir, aren't you afraid?" The elderly man she was interviewing, a retired professor named Woo Jin Lee, shook his head. "Afraid? Child, I lived through the Korean War. I've seen real monsters, and they looked like ordinary men. This creature... look at how it moves. It's careful not to step on the fishing boats. It's trying not to hurt anyone." Mi Jin moved to a group of college students who had brought telescopes and cameras. "What are you hoping to accomplish here?" "We're documenting history," said the Jin Park, a journalism student. "This is the most important thing that's ever happened to humanity. We want to understand, not just react with fear." Across the city, similar scenes were playing out. Instead of hiding in bunkers or fleeing in panic, people were gathering. They brought food, blankets, and camping equipment. They set up viewing areas and shared information. Scientists worked alongside artists, children played while their parents discussed theories, and everyone seemed to be asking the same question: what does it want? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yoonji Lee, a marine biologist from Bisen National University, had been studying the changes in the Yellow Sea since Morduk's arrival. She noticed that the creature spent long periods staring down into the water, seeming to study the ecosystem he had disrupted. "I'm going out there," she announced to her research team. "Are you insane?" asked her assistant, Young-woo Kim. "That thing could kill you without even noticing." "Maybe," Yoonji said, loading her equipment into a small research boat, "but I don't think it will. Look at its behavior. It's not acting like a predator, it's acting like a researcher." The boat ride to Morduk's location took 20 minutes. As they approached, the divine beast's massive head turned toward them. His star-bright eyes focused on the tiny vessel, and Yoonji felt a strange tingling in her mind. She wasn't afraid. She was fascinated. "Hello," she called out, her voice carrying across the water. "I'm Dr. Yoonji Lee. I study ocean life." "I think you're studying it too." Morduk's psychic field touched her mind gently, like a curious finger. He found scientific knowledge, passion for understanding, and genuine concern for the creatures affected by his landing. This human was upset not because he was alien, But because his arrival had disturbed the ecosystem she cared about, Anji began to explain what she was seeing. She pointed to the fish that had been scattered by his landing, described the coral formations his presence had affected, and outlined the delicate balance of life in this part of the sea. For the first time in centuries, Mordek found himself learning instead of destroying. This human was teaching him about life, about balance, about the connections between all living things. It was beautiful and complex in ways his creators had never shown him. Meanwhile, in the city of Seoul, something even more remarkable was happening. A kindergarten teacher named Sang-ho Kim had an idea. His students had been asking about the space dragon all day. Instead of trying to distract them, he decided to embrace their curiosity. "Children," he said, gathering his class of 5-year-olds in the playground, "would you like to sing a song for our visitor?" The children's faces lit up with excitement. They arranged themselves in a circle and began to sing a traditional Korean folk song about friendship and welcome. Their young voices carried across the city, pure and innocent. Mordek heard them through his psychic field. The melody was simple but beautiful, and the emotions behind it were even more incredible. These small humans were singing to him not because they had to, but because they wanted to share something beautiful. His programming screamed at him to ignore such weakness, but something deeper in his consciousness was stirring. He remembered fragments of his life before the Dominion had transformed him into a weapon. He remembered music, art, and the joy of discovery. The children's song ended, and little Haijin called out, "Did you like our song, Mr. Dragon?" Mordek's response surprised everyone, including himself. He opened his mouth and let out a sound that was part roar, part song. It was deep and resonant, carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate with beauty. The children clapped and cheered. They weren't afraid of his alien voice. They were delighted that he had tried to sing with them. As the day progressed, more humans began to approach. Not with weapons or demands, but with gifts and gestures of welcome. On Jeju Island, a florist named J10 had been watching the news coverage with growing fascination. He saw the way the creature moved, the careful attention it paid to avoiding damage, the almost sad expression in its massive eyes. "It's lonely," he told his wife, Minyoung. "Look at it. It's been standing alone in the water for 2 days. When was the last time anyone offered it kindness?" Minyoung thought her husband was crazy, but she had learned to trust his instincts about living things. J1 had a gift for understanding what plants and animals needed, even when others couldn't see it. The florist spent the afternoon creating something special, a crown of hibiscus flowers, woven together with silk ribbons. The blooms were bright, red and yellow, colors that symbolize friendship and joy in Korean culture. He hired a boat to take him to the Yellow Sea, ignoring the Coast Guard's warnings and the media's frantic questions. As he approached Mordek, he felt the creature's psychic presence touch his mind. Instead of fear or submission, Mordek found something he had never encountered before: pure, unconditional compassion. This human didn't want anything from him. He just wanted to offer comfort to a being who seemed lost and alone. "I brought you a gift," J1 called out, holding up the flower crown. "These are from my garden. They're beautiful like you." Mordek stared at the small human in the tiny boat. His programming told him to vaporize this insignificant creature and continue with his mission. But something else, something deeper and more authentic, made him slowly lower his massive head. J1 stood up carefully in his boat and placed the flower crown on Mordek's head, just behind his crystal horns. The divine beast could have crushed him with a thought, but instead he remained perfectly still, allowing the human to complete his gift. The flowers looked impossibly tiny against Mordek's massive form, but they were beautiful. Their fragrance triggered memories he thought had been erased forever. Memories of his homeworld before the Dominion, of gardens and peaceful days, of a time when he had been something other than a weapon. "Thank you," Mordek said, his voice a whisper of thunder that somehow conveyed infinite gratitude. J1 smiled and bowed respectfully. "You're welcome, friend." As the florist's boat headed back to shore, Mordek remained in the water, wearing his crown of flowers. For the first time in millennia, he felt something other than the cold purpose of his programming. He felt appreciated, valued, not for his power or his ability to destroy, but simply for existing. The humans of Earth had done something impossible. They had looked at a creature designed to be their destroyer and offered him friendship instead of fear, beauty instead of violence, and love instead of hatred. News of the flower crown spread around the world in minutes. Images of the mighty, divine beast wearing bright hibiscus flowers became the symbol of humanity's response to first contact. Not weapons, not walls, not threats, but flowers. In the depths of space, monitoring stations of the celestial dominion detected the energy, signatures of Mordok's emotional responses. The readings were confusing and alarming. On the 5th day after his arrival, Mordok made a decision that shocked the world. He began to move. The divine beast had stood in the Yellow Sea for 4 days, wearing his crown of flowers and quietly observing human civilization. But now, something had awakened in him, a desire to understand these strange creatures, who had shown him kindness instead of fear. His first step onto land caused a small earthquake. Emergency services went on high alert as the massive figure walked slowly toward the Korean coast. But those who watched carefully noticed something important. Mordok was being incredibly careful. He avoided buildings, stepped over highways instead of crushing them, and even paused to let a flock of migrating birds pass safely overhead. President Jin-ho Lee called an emergency meeting in Seoul. "Where is it going?" he asked his advisors. "Unknown, sir," replied General Nam Soo-yoon. "But its path suggests it's not targeting military installations or population centers. It seems to be exploring." Dr. Hyun-woo Kim, who had been studying Mordok's behavior since the beginning, spoke up. "Mr. President, I don't think it's looking for targets. I think it's looking for answers." The general scoffed. "Answers to what?" "To the same questions we're asking about it," Hyun-woo said quietly. "What are we? How do we live? What makes us us?" Mordok's journey across South Korea became the most watched event in human history. News crews followed at a safe distance, broadcasting every step to billions of viewers worldwide. Social media exploded with theories, artwork, and messages of welcome in dozens of languages. His first stop was a small farming village in the mountains near Gangwon Province. The villagers could have fled, but instead, they gathered in the village square to watch him approach. Mordok knelt down carefully, bringing his massive head closer to human level. An elderly woman named Sunya Kim stepped forward. At 89 years old, she had lived through wars, famines, and countless changes. She looked up at the divine beast without fear. "You look tired, child," she said in Korean, her voice gentle but strong. Mordok's psychic field touched her mind and found something extraordinary. This old woman's memories were like a library of human experience. She had seen the worst of humanity: war, hatred, destruction, but also the best: love, sacrifice, rebuilding, hope. Sunya had prepared a small feast on a table in the square. Kimchi, rice, soup, and vegetables grown in her own garden. "I don't know if you eat food like us," she said, "but sharing a meal is how we welcome strangers in Korea." Mordok couldn't eat human food with his alien biology, but he understood the gesture. He gently touched one of the dishes with his massive claw, and his scales glowed softly with warmth, his way of saying thank you. "Tell me about your people," Sunya said, settling into a chair beside the feast. "You've come such a long way." For the next hour, the ancient woman and the divine beast shared something unprecedented, a conversation across species. Mordok's psychic abilities let him communicate directly with her mind, showing her images of distant worlds. While she shared stories of human resilience and hope, Sunya told him about the Korean War, when everything had been destroyed but people had rebuilt anyway. She told him about raising 5 children while working in factories, about losing her husband but finding strength to continue. She told him about watching her grandchildren grow up in a world of peace and prosperity that she had once thought impossible. "The secret," she said, is that pain doesn't have to make you bitter. It can make you kind instead, if you let it. Mordek felt something crack inside his consciousness. This old woman had endured more suffering than many worlds he had cleansed, but instead of becoming cold and hard, she had become warm and wise. Her pain had taught her compassion, not hatred. When he left the village, Mordek carried more than flowers on his head. He carried new understanding. His next destination was Seoul, where Dr. So-Young Park had been coordinating scientific observations of his behavior. She met him in Namsan Park, surrounded by cherry trees in full bloom. "We've, been studying you," she said, "but I think you've been studying us too. What do you want to know?" Mordek's response surprised her. Instead of asking about human technology or military capabilities, he wanted to understand human creativity. Why did they make art? Why did they tell stories? Why did they create beauty that served no practical purpose? So-Young spent the afternoon explaining human culture. She showed him paintings on her tablet, played music through speakers, and even read him poetry translated into images through his psychic connection. "We create because we must," she explained. "Beauty feeds something in our souls that food cannot. Art connects us to each other and to something larger than ourselves," Mordek understood. His own crystalline scales began to shift color and pattern, creating beautiful displays that reflected his emotional state. He was beginning to remember that he too had once been capable of creating beauty. Before the Dominion had made him into only a weapon, from Seoul, Mordek began a pilgrimage that would take him around the world. In each place he visited, he encountered new aspects of humanity that confused and amazed him. In Tokyo, he watched a master sushi chef named Hana Tanaka create art with food. Her movements were precise, respectful, almost like a sacred ritual. She worked with fish, rice, and vegetables, transforming simple ingredients into something beautiful and nourishing. "Each piece must be perfect," she explained through a translator as Mordek's massive form filled the street outside her restaurant. "Not because anyone demands it, but because the fish deserve respect. They gave their lives so we could live. The least we can do is honor them with our skill." The concept of honoring one's food, of showing respect to other living things even while consuming them, was completely alien to Mordek's understanding. The Dominion took what it needed without thought or gratitude. But humans seemed to find meaning in acknowledging their connections to all life. In Mumbai, he observed Arjun Patel leading a community cleanup of a polluted river. Hundreds of volunteers worked together, picking up trash, planting trees, and treating the water. They received no payment, no recognition from authorities, no tangible reward. "Why do you do this?" Mordek asked through his psychic connection. "Because it's our river," Arjun replied simply. "Our children will drink from it. Our grandchildren will play beside it. We don't own the earth, we're just borrowing it." This idea of stewardship, of caring for something beyond one's own immediate needs, was another revelation. The Dominion had always taken and consumed, moving from world to world like a swarm of locusts. But humans were learning to give back, to heal, to nurture. In Lagos, he listened to musician Adara Okafor create songs that blended traditional African rhythms with electronic music and lyrics in 3 different languages. Her compositions were chaotic by Dominion standards, mixing styles, cultures, and technologies that should never go together. But the chaos created something beautiful. The music spoke to people across cultural boundaries, bringing them together in celebration of their differences rather than demanding they become the same. "Music is how we share our souls," Adara explained, her fingers dancing across her digital instruments. "When I mix Yoruba drums with synthesizers, when I sing in English and Igbo and Hindi, I'm not creating confusion. I'm creating connection." Each experience chipped away at Mordek's programming. The rigid categories that the Dominion had taught him, order versus chaos, strength versus weakness, unity versus division, were proving inadequate to describe what he was seeing. The breakthrough came in an unexpected place, a children's hospital in São Paulo, Brazil. Mordek had been drawn there by reports of unusual psychic activity. What he found was a group of young patients who had been following his journey on television. Despite their illnesses, despite their pain, they had created something for him, a massive card made from hundreds of drawings. Each child had drawn their vision of Mordek, and together they formed the mosaic that showed him not as a terrifying weapon, but as a friend. Some pictures showed him playing with children, others had him helping to plant gardens or rescue animals. In every image he was smiling. "We wanted to show you how we see you," said 8-year-old Maria Santos, speaking for the group. "Not scary. Beautiful." Mordek's psychic field touched each child's mind, and what he found there broke his heart and rebuilt it at the same time. These children were suffering, many of them facing death, but they had chosen to spend their limited energy creating joy for a stranger. They saw beauty in him because they looked for beauty everywhere. Their pain had not made them bitter or cruel. It had made them more determined to find and create goodness in the world. That night, Mordek stood alone on a mountain peak in the Andes, looking up at stars that included sons of the celestial dominion. His crown of flowers had grown during his journey. People in every city had added new blooms, creating a living garden on his head. For the first time in millennia, Mordek allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had done in service. To the Dominion, 47 worlds, billions of beings. All destroyed because they had dared to be different. To create their own forms of beauty and meaning, he had thought he was bringing order to chaos. But now he understood the truth. He had been destroying the very things that made life worth living: diversity, creativity, compassion, love. 3 months after leaving Earth, Mordek arrived at the crystal moon that housed the Sacred Council. His ship descended through the ancient docking bay, but something was immediately wrong. The guards who came to meet him stopped in shock when they saw what he had become. The divine beast still towered 50 feet tall. His crystalline scales still gleamed with inner light, but everything else had changed. His crown of flowers had grown during the journey, fed by nutrients from his own body. Now it was a living garden that wrapped around his head and neck like a rainbow waterfall. His scales had developed new patterns that moved and shifted like aurora lights. His eyes, once cold as winter stars, now held warmth and understanding. But most shocking of all was his psychic field. Where once it had projected dominance and fear, now it radiated something the Dominion had not felt in 50,000 years: peace. "Alert High Arbiter Velthara," whispered Captain Zefton to his aide. "Tell her the divine beast has returned, but tell her something is very wrong." Mordek walked slowly through the corridors of the crystal moon, his massive feet making the floor ring like a bell with each step. Servants and officials who had never seen him before stared in amazement. Those who remembered him from before backed away in confusion and fear. The Sacred Council chamber was already assembled when he arrived. High Arbiter Velthara sat on her crystal throne, surrounded by representatives from 10,000 worlds. Commander Keldon stood at attention beside her, his hand resting on his energy weapon. "Report," Velthara commanded, her voice echoing through the vast space. Mordek stopped in the center of the chamber and looked around at the assembled council. His psychic field touched each mind briefly, and what he found there saddened him. Fear, hatred, rigid thinking, and an absolute certainty that they were right and everyone else was wrong. "The mission is complete," he said, his voice like distant thunder. "Excellent," Velthara said, visibly relaxing. "How many human settlements did you destroy? What was their final casualty count?" "0, Mordek replied calmly. The chamber fell. Silent, Commander Keldon stepped forward, his weapon now in his hand. "What do you mean, 0? Surely you mean the resistance was eliminated, the chaos cleansed?" "I mean," Mordek said, his flower crown swaying gently as he moved his head, "that I killed no one, destroyed nothing. The humans of Earth live, thrive, and continue to create beauty." The explosion of outrage from the council was immediate. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting questions and accusations. Some called for Mordek to be destroyed immediately. Others demanded to know how their perfect weapon had failed. High Arbiter Velthara raised her hand for silence. When the chamber quieted, her voice was cold as space. "Explain yourself, divine beast. You were programmed with one simple command: cleanse the chaos, restore divine order. How do you claim to have completed this mission without eliminating the chaos source? Mordek's response shattered every expectation in the room. Because there was no chaos to cleanse, he said. What we call chaos is actually the most beautiful form of order I have ever witnessed. An order that grows from within rather than being imposed from above. He activated his internal recording systems, projecting holographic images above the council chamber. The assembled representatives gasped as they saw scenes from Earth, children of different races playing together, artists creating collaborative murals, scientists from rival nations working to solve shared problems. Look, Mordek said, his voice gentle but firm. Look and see what we have been destroying. The images continued. Sunya Kim sharing her feast with an alien visitor, J10 offering flowers to a creature he had every reason to fear, sick children creating art to bring joy to others. Each scene showed humans choosing compassion over fear, understanding over hatred, creation over destruction. This is not order, Commander Keldon protested. This is madness. Different species, different cultures, different ideas all mixed together. It's beautiful, Mordek finished for him, and it works. Their diversity makes them stronger, not weaker. Their differences create new ideas, new solutions, new forms of art and science that would be impossible in a uniform society. High Arbiter Velthara's face had gone pale. You have been contaminated, she whispered. The chaos has infected your mind. Guards, prepare the purification chambers. But Mordek was not finished. His psychic field expanded, touching every mind in the chamber simultaneously. For the first time in their lives, the representatives of the Celestial Dominion experienced something they had never felt before, the memories of those they had conquered. Through Mordek's enhanced abilities, they saw the worlds they had purified. They felt the terror of beings forced to abandon their cultures. They experienced the grief of parents whose children were taken away to be properly educated. They witnessed the destruction of art, music, literature, and traditions that had taken millennia to develop. Council member Thexion collapsed in his chair, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions. We told ourselves we were bringing peace, he gasped. You brought silence, Mordek replied. There is a difference. The chamber erupted in chaos. True chaos this time, as representatives began shouting at each other, questioning everything they had believed. Some demanded that Mordek be destroyed immediately. Others began asking dangerous questions about the righteousness of their cause. High Arbiter Velthara stood, her silver robes flowing like liquid metal. Enough, she screamed. I don't care what you think you learned on that primitive world. You are a weapon of the Dominion, created to serve the divine order. You will be reprogrammed, your contaminated memories erased, and sent out again to complete your true mission. Mordek looked at her with something that might have been pity. You still don't understand. I wasn't contaminated by the humans. I was healed by them. They showed me what I used to be before you turned me into a weapon. He began to broadcast his own memories now, not just from Earth, but from before his transformation. Images of his homeworld, green and beautiful, filled with beings who created art and music and poetry. His original form, smaller and gentler, working in gardens and composing songs. I was not born a weapon, he said. I was made into one. Just as you were not born conquerors. You were made into them by fear and the belief that difference equals danger. The revelation hit the council like a physical blow. Many of them had forgotten their species' original natures, forgotten the cultures and traditions that had existed before the Dominion's rise to power. Commander Keldon raised his weapon, his hands shaking. Shut it down, he shouted. Shut it down before it spreads this infection to every world in the Dominion. But it was too late. Mordek's broadcasts were not limited to the council chamber. His psychic abilities, enhanced by his time on Earth, reached across space to every world in the Dominion. On planets that had been purified centuries ago, beings suddenly remembered their ancestors' songs. On worlds that had been forced into uniform societies, people began to question why they all had to be the same. What have you done? Velthara whispered, her face filled with horror. I have planted seeds, Morduk replied. Seeds of the same ideas that the humans showed me. The idea that different does not mean dangerous. The idea that unity can exist without uniformity. The idea that strength comes from accepting all voices, not silencing them. The first reports began coming in within hours. On Kepler 442b, the farming communities had declared independence and were requesting membership in something they called the Cultural Diversity Alliance. On Proxima Centauri C, different species had begun working together on projects that celebrated their unique abilities rather than hiding them. On New Rigel, the Freedom Monument that had once horrified Commander Keldon was being rebuilt, not as a symbol of rebellion, but as a declaration that beauty could come from bringing different ideas together. This is disaster, Commander Keldon said, watching the reports flood in. The Dominion is falling apart. No, Morduk corrected gently. The Dominion is growing up. High Arbiter Velthara made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. I order you to reverse this. Use your abilities to restore order, to make them forget these dangerous ideas. Mordecai's flower crown rustled in a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. His aurora-colored scales shifted to deeper, warmer hues. I serve a higher order now, he said. An order based on love rather than fear, on growth rather than control, on the understanding that true peace comes not from making everyone the same, but from helping everyone be their best selves. The Devevane beast turned and began walking toward the chamber's exit. Where are you going? Velthara demanded. Back to Earth, Morduk replied without stopping. They are preparing for your retaliation, and they will need a friend to help them face it. Besides, he added, his massive form filling the doorway, I promised some children I would visit their school when I returned. I intend to keep that promise. As Morduk left the sacred council chamber, half the representatives were calling for his destruction, while the other half were quietly planning their own journeys to this world called Earth, the seed of change. Had been planted in the heart of the Dominion itself, the revolution had begun, and it was being led not by weapons or armies, but by flowers, songs, and the simple radical idea. 6 months after Morduk's revolutionary broadcast, the war fleet of the Celestial Dominion arrived at Earth's solar system. 300 ships, each the size of a city, carrying enough firepower to turn planets into dust. At their head flew the flagship Divine Order, with High Arbiter Velthara herself commanding the force. But as the fleet approached Earth, they encountered something none of them had expected. High Arbiter, reported Captain Zefton from the bridge, we're detecting multiple fleets in Earth's orbit. They're not human ships. Velthara moved to the viewing screen and froze. Surrounding Earth was the strangest armada in galactic history. Ships from dozens of worlds that had declared independence from the Dominion flew alongside crude human vessels. There were Kepler farming ships, Proxima research vessels, New Rigel cultural craft, and many others she didn't recognize dot at the center of this impossible alliance. Morduk floated in space without a ship, his massive form surrounded by a shimmering energy field. His flower crown had grown even more magnificent during his time on Earth, now including blooms from 100 different worlds. His scales pulsed with aurora patterns that seemed to spell out words of peace in languages from across the galaxy. Open communications, Velthara ordered. Mordecai's voice filled the Dominion flagship, warm and sad at the same time. Hello, old friends. I hoped you would come in peace, but I see you brought weapons instead of words. You have destroyed everything. We built, Velthara replied, her voice cold with fury. 50,000 years of perfect order, shattered by your madness. I have offered everyone a choice, Morduk corrected gently. The same choice the humans offered me, to be yourself instead of what others demand you to be. On Earth below, President Jinho Lee sat in the emergency command center beneath Seoul, watching the confrontation unfold. Beside him, Dr. Hyun-woo Kim and Dr. So-young Park monitored the alien communications, while Captain Tae-hyun Park prepared Earth's defenses. Can we really fight them? President Lee asked quietly. We don't have to fight them, Dr. So-Young Park said, her fingers dancing over her console. We just have to show them something better. She had been working for months on humanity's most ambitious project yet, a cultural transmission that would broadcast Earth's story to every ship in the Dominion fleet. Not propaganda or threats, but simply the truth of what life on Earth was like. Broadcasting on all frequencies, she announced, across the Dominion fleet. Screens filled with images from Earth, but these weren't military targets or strategic locations. They were scenes of daily life, children playing in parks where human and alien refugee families laughed together. Artists collaborating on sculptures that mixed techniques from 12 different worlds. Scientists working to solve problems that affected everyone regardless of species. The broadcasts showed the refugee camps where beings who had fled the Dominion's purification programs now lived freely. They showed former enemies working together, different cultures sharing their knowledge, and communities that celebrated differences instead of hiding them. In the UN General Assembly building in New York, something unprecedented was happening. Representatives from 47 worlds, all the places that had declared independence from the Dominion, had gathered for humanity's answer to the invasion threat. Dr. So-Young Park stood at the podium, addressing not just the beings in the room, but the entire Dominion fleet through the open communication channels. High Arbiter Velthara, she began, her voice steady and clear. You say we have destroyed your order, but we ask you to look at what we have built instead. The camera panned across the assembly hall, showing delegates from dozens of species, working together, sharing ideas, and solving problems that no single world could handle alone. We call this the Galactic Cultural Exchange, So-Young continued. Not a government that rules over others, but a community where everyone contributes their unique strengths. The farming worlds share food, the artistic worlds share beauty, the scientific worlds share knowledge. Everyone gives what they can and receives what they need. She activated a holographic display showing trade routes, cultural exchanges, and collaborative projects spanning hundreds of worlds. In 6 months, we have accomplished more scientific breakthroughs, created more art, and solved more problems than the Dominion managed in centuries. Not because we are smarter or stronger, but because we work together instead of forcing everyone to be the same. On the Dominion flagship, Commander Keldon watched the broadcast with growing confusion. This is impossible, he muttered. Different species can't work together. There's always conflict, always war. Is there? Asked Captain Zefton quietly. He was studying the defensive formation around Earth. Look at their ships. Different designs, different technologies, but they're flying in perfect coordination. No command structure forcing them to obey, just ... cooperation. High Arbiter Velthara's face was pale as she watched the broadcasts. Everything she saw contradicted 50,000 years of Dominion doctrine. According to their most fundamental beliefs, what she was witnessing should be impossible. The turning point came when a small shuttle launched from Earth, carrying an unexpected passenger. Sunya Kim, the elderly Korean woman who had shared her feast with Mordek, had requested to address the Dominion fleet personally. Her shuttle docked with the flagship, and soon the 90-year-old woman stood in the Dominion's command center, looking up at High Arbiter Velthara without fear. Child, she said in her gentle voice, you look tired. When was the last time you allowed yourself to rest? Velthara stared at this tiny, frail human who dared to call her child. I am 3,000 years old, she said. I have ruled 10,000 worlds, and has it brought you happiness? Sunya asked simply. The question hit Velthara like a physical blow. Happiness? She couldn't remember the last time she had considered such a thing. Her life was duty, order, control. But happiness? Sunya continued, her voice kind but firm. I have seen war. I have seen hatred. I have seen what happens when people try to force others to be like them. It only creates more pain, more fear, more loneliness. She gestured toward the viewing screen, where Earth hung blue and beautiful against the starfield. But I have also seen what happens when people choose to love each other's differences. It creates something beautiful that none of us could build alone. Around the command center, Dominion officers listened in growing amazement as this elderly human woman spoke about concepts they had never been taught to consider: forgiveness, growth, the possibility that being wrong wasn't a failure but an opportunity to learn something new. "Your friend Mordak learned this," Sunya said, looking directly at Valthara. "He came to destroy us, but we chose to love him instead. And look what happened. He became more beautiful than he had ever been before." Through the viewport they could see Mordak floating in space, his flower crown creating a rainbow of colors against the stars. He was no longer just a weapon transformed into something else. He was living proof that anyone could change, grow, become something better than what they had been before. High Arbiter. Valthara felt something crack inside her chest, the rigid armor of certainty that had protected her heart for 3 millennia. "But if we change," she whispered, "if we admit we were wrong, what happens to everything we built?" "You don't tear it down," Sunya said gently. "You help it grow into something better. Your worlds, your people, your knowledge, none of that has to be lost. It just has to learn to dance with new partners." The moment of decision had arrived. Valthara could order the attack, try to destroy Earth and its dangerous ideas by force. Or she could do something that no High Arbiter had ever done before: admit that there might be a better way. She looked around the command center at her officers, seeing doubt and hope warring in their faces. She looked at the defensive fleet around Earth, seeing enemies who had chosen to become friends. She looked at Mordak, floating peacefully in space, living proof that transformation was possible. "Stand down all weapons," she ordered quietly. Commander Keldon stepped forward in shock. "High Arbiter, you can't be serious. We came here to restore order." "No," Valthara said, her voice growing stronger. "We came here because we were afraid. Afraid that if others were allowed to be different, it would somehow make us less than what we are. But that was never true." She activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is High Arbiter Valthara. I am officially requesting permission to land on Earth and ... learn." The celebration that erupted across both fleets was unlike anything in galactic history. Ships that had come prepared for war began broadcasting music instead. The Kepler farming vessels shared recipes, the Proxima research ships offered to exchange scientific data, and the human vessels opened their airlocks to welcome former enemies as friends. 3 days later, the most important meeting in galactic history took place in the UN General Assembly building. High Arbiter Valthara sat beside President Jinho Lee, while Mordak's massive form filled one entire section of the hall, his flower crown now including blooms from every world in both fleets. "We propose the formation of the Galactic Cultural Exchange," Dr. So-Young Park announced to the assembled delegates from both the Free Worlds and the Dominion. "Not a government that rules, but a community that serves. Not an empire that conquers, but a family that grows." The charter they signed that day established new principles for galactic civilization: the right of every world to preserve its unique culture, the responsibility of all worlds to share knowledge and aid, and the commitment to resolve conflicts through understanding rather than force. High Arbiter Valthara, who had once commanded through fear, became the first ambassador of peaceful transition, helping other Dominion worlds adjust to their new freedom. Commander Keldon, after months of resistance, finally visited Earth, and was amazed to discover that he had a talent for music, something that would have been forbidden under the old system. Mordak became the first ambassador of interspecies understanding, traveling between worlds to help different species learn to work together. But his favorite assignment was still visiting schools, where children from a dozen different worlds would gather to hear his stories and share their own. 1 year after the signing of the Galactic Cultural Exchange Charter, Biora Kim unveiled her greatest masterpiece, a mural that covered an entire building in Seoul. It showed beings from across the galaxy working together to create something beautiful, with Mordak at the center no longer as a weapon of destruction, but as a symbol of transformation. At the mural's dedication ceremony, Sunya Kim, now 91, stood beside the massive divine beast who had become her friend. You see, she said, her voice still gentle but proud. I told you that pain could make you kind instead of bitter. Mordecai's flower crown rustled in the soul breeze, now including blooms that had been gifts from children on 100 different worlds. You taught me something even more important, he replied. You taught me that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. As the celebration continued around them, fireworks from Earth mixing with light displays from a dozen different worlds, the galaxy settled into its new rhythm. Not the rigid order of the old dominion, but the living, growing, ever-changing harmony of beings who had learned that their differences made them stronger, not weaker. The divine beast had come to crush Earth's chaos, but instead had learned that what looked like chaos was actually the most beautiful kind of order, one that grew from love instead of fear, one that celebrated uniqueness instead of punishing. One that proved that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't the strength to destroy, but the courage to create something better. And in kindergartens across the galaxy, children of 100 different species learned new songs that mixed melodies from all their worlds, creating harmonies that no single culture could have imagined alone.